Buenos días. I gotta put my clock here before they give me the hook. So thank you so much for being here today. This is a very special occasion. It's the first sort of large conference focusing on the rebuilding of Puerto Rico. And I want to thank all the organizers, especially Francis, Margarita, Federico, and all the other planning groups, everyone that was representing these organizations that put this together. NACOPRO, Boricua Activate, Senadores, National Puerto Rican Agenda, and all the others. 100 Days for Puerto Rico. Am I missing someone? And the Latino students. I mentioned NACOPRO. Sarah always gives me a hard time. But in any case, it is my pleasure to be here. And my first thought is Maria has changed everything. Whatever you were doing before Maria, it changed, because this is so overwhelming to us. Today more than ever, we need to activate a network of solidarity with Puerto Rico to cope with the humanitarian crisis that was on top of an economic crisis, of a fiscal crisis, and let's say also a political crisis. So all these are interacting events that have brought Puerto Rico to a point in history that is without precedent, whether you look at the catastrophe side, the humanitarian crisis, or you look at any of the other contextual factors that make the recovery of Puerto Rico so difficult. Today, 8 weeks after the catastrophe, we still have not a clear count of how many fatalities we had. I don't want to go too much into that, but we are sure that it exceeds the official count. About less than half of the people in Puerto Rico have access to electricity, and that's electrical generation, not actual household having electricity. Running water is still lacking in many parts of the island. All of this is spatially based, meaning that in some parts of the interior, all the statistics mean nothing. They still don't have access through roads, they still don't have running water or even food. Diesel is still a problem, and people are still in shelters. We're not counting the tens of thousands of people whose homes were destroyed that are staying with families and friends. The economy was devastated. It's estimated that more than 100,000 were damaged by the storm. Almost all the agricultural base was destroyed. At the time when the farm-to-table movement were gaining momentum, they generated about 8,000 jobs the prior year. The crops were destroyed. It will take a few years to do restoration. Hotels are operational, but at a very low capacity. Most of them are actually occupied by people who are in the rebuilding effort. Unemployment has more than doubled. Now you start seeing the lines in front of the Labor Department. And income in Puerto Rico is going to continue declining. Over the last 10 years, income declined by 1 or 2% a year. It's estimated that the total loss of income will be up to $180 billion, which, by the way, will be like 20 times the budget of the Puerto Rico government, to give you a perspective. So I will say that the federal response in Puerto Rico was at least erratic, inconsistent. They didn't have the footprint when the storm hit Puerto Rico. They didn't have enough staff move there afterwards. They're still trying to recruit people to help them with the estimation of the damages. Now, that could be in part a result of the hurricane season that have hit Texas and Irma and other parts of the state so harshly. But there are other things. For example, the deployment of the Comfort ship. It took a week to order it there. It took another 10 days to get there. And when it got there, they came with 250 beds. And the last week, they had 30 beds occupied. So it's lackadaisical. It's not exactly what we were expected in view of what happened in Puerto Rico. The Army Corps of Engineers had a minimum deployment, and they already pulled the troops out of Puerto Rico. So one of the major problems in Puerto Rico is the restoration of the electrical grid. It was damaged. Some people claim that the damage was not as extensive as was the short response from the staff that can actually restore the grid. And so that's in dispute. We still need to see how it plays out. But by comparison, there were many more people available to both Texas and Florida right after the storms that they are even closed in Puerto Rico. It all got entangled in PREPA politics. You all know the Whitefish contract. I'm not even going to go there today. But it shows a lack of local response as well. Now, all of this hardship, all of this catastrophe has resulted in a bigger problem, which is the depopulation of Puerto Rico. So it is estimated, let me show the graphic, which I prefer to use for explanation. If you look at the blue shade, that area is about 500,000 people. For those of you who know about GIS stuff and spatial stuff, it's about 500,000 people. It took more than 10 years, from 2006 to 2016, to accumulate that number of net migrants to the US. Guess what? Over the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to have about 500,000 people leaving Puerto Rico. Okay, so some people think that we are underestimating. Some people think we're overestimating. But let me tell you, there are no indicators right now. The movement of passengers is not a reliable indicator because people come and go all the time. They come in for a break to Florida or New York, and then they go back to Puerto Rico. But what is a good indicator are kids registered at school. So the transfers of school in Florida, the transfer of, the registering of kids in Florida is unprecedented. They're already reaching about 10,000, and that's a good indicator of people that are planning to stay. Families that are moving that are not going back. And this is just beginning. But when you look what that does to Puerto Rico, this graphic actually shows the population patterns in terms of the diaspora, people that reside in the US and people that reside in Puerto Rico. That graphic, which I have updated every year for the last 10 years possibly, right, had a turning point with the beginning of the crisis, when there were about equal number of Puerto Ricans both in the island and stateside. But guess what? Today, prior to the Hurricane Maria, we had about 3.5 million residents in Puerto Rico, including most of them Puerto Ricans, and about 5.5 million Puerto Ricans in the diaspora. Guess what? At the end of this period, there will be 6 million Puerto Ricans of the next 2 or 3 years in the diaspora, and less than 3 million Puerto Ricans in the island of Puerto Rico. That depopulation will represent a significant blow to the economic recovery of the island. Most of the people that are leaving are going to Florida, as we know, but guess what? There are other states like Florida and Texas that are also pulling significant number of immigrants to their areas. When those immigrants get there, they need culturally competent services. Okay? In Florida is an outstanding state. The governor declared emergency. That will mean that they will subsidize localities that have to do with school transfer, that will have to do with Social Security, Medicare transfers. They're putting resources there. Not every state is doing that. A lot of universities are accepting students as on temporary basis and subsidizing their tuition. But all those people that are moving to the States need culturally competent services. Many of them need trauma counseling and psychological treatment. So that's an agenda that we cannot ignore. It is important to support Puerto Rico, but it's also important to understand that this exodus, this relocation of a massive group of people that are coming to our communities also deserve attention. So all in all, we have an opportunity. You are going to ask yourself 10 years from now, where was I when Maria hit Puerto Rico? Because it has changed history for the Puerto Rican people. It has really transformed where we are in our history. And here we have the opportunity in the diaspora to build a solidarity movement, to create a coalition that will be responsive to the needs of our people right now. There are many coalitions that are emerging all over the country. And guess what? We need more. It's not enough for the task at hand. It's not enough for the task at hand in Puerto Rico, and it's definitely not enough to organize Puerto Ricans as a more unified voice, to speak not just for Puerto Rico, but also for all Puerto Ricans. All 9 million people, not just those who are there, or not just those who are here. We need to create a more unified voice for Puerto Rico. Now, I will advance to you, and in the time that I have left, I will address these 3 points in some more details. That we have 3 points in the agenda that is going to play out throughout the day. The first one is that we really need to build an advocacy coalition to support a policy agenda for Puerto Rico. There are some coalitions out there with policies agendas. We just need to coalesce even more to try to have a unified message in the Hill. Okay, we need to go there with a more unified and more active agenda for Puerto Rico. We also need to create better ways to communicate with each other. We need to create information hubs. So each one of these organizations have their mail list, have their newsletters, but how do we try to combine all that so that if and when one of us do something, the rest will pick it up? When we, by the way, central hashtag for Rebuild Puerto Rico is, and Twitter and Facebook is just hashtag Rebuild PR. And I invite you to, let's have a Twitter party right now. All the young people that understand what I'm saying, start tweeting. So in any case, and those at home, in any case, the third thing that we need is to build a people-to-people movement. And I'm going to, if I can, speak a little bit about that. But we need to go from civic sector to civic sector, from the diaspora to Puerto Rico. And we need to be respectful of each other. We need to respect what their priorities are out there. And if we go to help, make sure that we don't just go there in a parachute, but that we have a preparatory work that will allow us to be effective where they think we could be effective. But it's also formative to our students, to our faculty, to our volunteers to go there and experience collaboration directly with them. So what about the advocacy agenda that we need to discuss throughout the day? The first thing is do no harm. And there is a bill for tax reform that will do great harm to Puerto Rico if it moves the way it is. I had to spend the last 2 days trying to understand this more in depth, but the news are not good for Puerto Rico. Among other things, they're imposing a 20% tariff on Puerto Rican goods. That changes the whole equation, the whole pact between Puerto Rico and the United States. Because the premise number one is we're going to share the military, we're going to share the money, and we're going to share the market. They're changing that by imposing a tariff. They are changing the pact that we had with them since we sent our children to wars in the First War and the Second War. They might legitimize a deduction that is right now in limbo, Act 154, that produces about more than 20% of our tax revenues in the government. But I think that the most damaging part is that Puerto Rico's situation with respect to foreign investment will change. Puerto Rico is in a weird situation. By the way, American policy towards their territories is incoherent. Some territories have Jones Act, some others don't have it. So guess what? For tax purposes, right, manufacturing in Puerto Rico is considered foreign investment. But for exports and trade, it's considered domestic. And that has been like that for a long while. But guess what? If the United States accept a territorial system as part of this legislation, Puerto Rico will be in a limbo. It could go one way, it could go the other way, and it can really dismantle industries like manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing, and pharmacy in Puerto Rico. Those are key job generation industries in Puerto Rico. To give you an idea, some people argue that all the money that foreign corporations in Puerto Rico make, they keep in Europe and other places away from the United States. Well, it's not true. About, in 2010, which is the data that I have handy for this presentation, about $8 billion were repatriated. That will be probably from about a 35 to 40 billion profit generation by multinational corporations in Puerto Rico. As an economist, I will say that's a longer conversation. It's just transfer prices, property rights, and a complicated equation. But the point is that about 8 billion of those were repatriated to the United States, and they pay taxes. And they pay taxes that were somewhat competitive with other destinations such as Ireland and Singapore. At this point, I'm going to come back in a little bit, okay? Because corporations in Puerto Rico do pay federal taxes when they repatriate the money. And this amount, about $1 billion that particular year, is not chop change. So in the immediate term, Puerto Rico needs disaster relief, and we need it now. The first appropriation was $37 billion, give and take, but only about $6 billion of that was earmarked to Puerto Rico. The rest went to FEMA, that went to Florida, to California, to Texas, and it was part of what they needed for the emergency phase. FEMA is all about the emergency phase, right? Guess what? We don't know in what part of the spectrum in emergency we are, because if you go to the metropolitan area, sectors that have electricity and water, there is no emergency anymore, right? But when you go to the rest of the country, they're still, in some areas, they don't have any of those services. So we're still in that process. So yesterday, the White House submitted another appropriation of about $44 billion, but there is no earmark for Puerto Rico. It's more of the same. It's going to the agencies that actually have something to do with emergency recovery, but there is no earmark about that. The three co-chairs of the caucus, Democratic caucus on Puerto Rico, Gutierrez, Velázquez, and Serrano, issue a statement about this. So we got to do something at the House and the Senate level to get some earmarking for Puerto Rico. Now, this is not the big package that we got in Katrina or Sandy and so forth, and I'm sure that the next panel will address some of that. Sandy, for example, has 18 different appropriations. So in any case, another contention here is that until FEMA sort of scales up the assessment of damage, it's going to be hard for that big appropriation to happen. And now it's in contention whether who's going to get that money. And you saw the hearings in the Capitol where the Natural Resources Committee sort of grilled the governor, and they basically, all the questioning and all the evidence that they brought to bear was basically, you know, you guys at the local level are somewhat erratic in your response to this. Look at Whitefish and so forth. And then the governor responded, rightly so, but we're the duly elected government of Puerto Rico. So they're, you know, and unfortunately, they're both right. So how are you going to reconcile two views as to where the money is going to go? Today, we're going to have a panel that is going to look at Katrina and what happened in Louisiana, and there was a model there, the Louisiana Recovery Authority. I don't know if that's the right model, but I'm looking forward to hearing whether that will be a hybrid solution, somewhere in between, that might solve the problem, where the Fiscal Oversight Board will do actually the oversight on the fiscal side, and the government will have somewhat authority to appoint people to that board that will have some autonomy to carry out the recovery. But that remains to be discussed. But in addition to that, Puerto Rico needs a big community development block grant for disaster recovery. These are the billions of dollars that you hear about other hurricanes. We need waivers from the Stafford Act for rebuilding restrictions, both in terms of the quality of what we're going to rebuild. That's especially important for two things: for the grid, to make the grid more modern, and also for housing. Are we going to rebuild to the old standards, or are we going to develop more resilient standards for what's coming ahead to us? And a lot of people claim that we need exemption from the Jones Act, at least temporarily. So we also need waivers for disaster assistance loan. This is the matching money that FEMA asked people to pay. And Medicaid is a big crisis. Right now we are without, almost running out of money. By February we should run out of the $295 million appropriation that we had last time. And there are a lot of nonprofit advocating for expansion of the child tax credit and the enactment of the earned income tax credit. And a lot of people are asking nowadays for a debt moratorium. So those are sort of the action items in the Hill that we need to pay attention as we move through the day. I will say this is an important talking point, okay? First is, there is an argument that Puerto Rico doesn't deserve all the help that we deserve as American citizens. And the rationality is that we don't pay taxes. But that's false. We don't have federal income taxes, but we pay every other tax that all other states pay, including corporate taxes, as I documented before. So anyone in the Capitol that tells you that, you gotta respond, no, we're not only American citizens, we're American citizens that pay their taxes like everybody else. Yes, we don't pay income taxes, federal income taxes. We pay plenty of state taxes, by the way, more than we want. In any case, coming back to what is it that we can do here today? Well, first of all, let's keep working at building that network, that advocacy coalition that can emerge from the organizations represented here today. And let's keep working on the civic sector to civic sector, from the diaspora to Puerto Rico. Let's keep working on that solidarity movement that will be based on equalitarian basis, on mutual respect basis, on the needs that they have there, and the needs and resources that we have here. But more importantly, we need to build the information hub for the diaspora movement. Each one of the organizations have that, but we need to unify that better. And at the end of the day, we need to convene many more forums like the one here today. Centro, and I'm going to wrap it up here, has been working in that direction. The Rebuild Puerto Rico is a site that offers all kind of information. As you know, this is part of a series of conferences that we have sponsored on this topic. We will continue that, but we invite everyone to really pay attention to us, to what we're doing in the website. We also have a roundtable that analyzes the debt in Puerto Rico and puts out policy brief every week. So I invite you to check that. Some of those reports are here in the table in the front, and that information is important to keep transparency, to keep accountability for both the federal government and the local government. At the end, where do we go from here? I think today is about understanding, awareness. At the end, we're going to have some engagement. The question really is, what do we do tomorrow? So I'm going to end with the words of Antonia Pantojas that train all of us aspirantes. Say, yes, you have to do awareness, you have to do understanding, but at the end of the day, it's time for action. Thank you very much.